Born in bondage, some units had to build trenches under constant enemy fire. Armies lost many soldiers while digging trenches, and this exceptional burden and sacrifice contributed to a unique sense of camaraderie among the troops. Friendships in the mud. In the conditions of mud, rain and cold, soldiers shared their most basic needs, including shelter, food, and water. Through joint efforts in maintaining the trenches, strong friendships were forged among the soldiers. Congratulations in the trench. Despite the harsh conditions, soldiers found ways to mark important moments. Perhaps a group of soldiers in the trench organized an improvised celebration to congratulate a particular soldier or observe a holiday. Where artists, soldiers often used trenches as a medium for artistic expression. On the walls of the trenches, one could find drawings, messages, and graffiti reflecting their creativity and expression. Congratulations in the trench. Despite the harsh conditions, soldiers found ways to mark important moments. Perhaps a group of soldiers in the trench organized an improvised celebration to congratulate a particular soldier or observe a holiday. Captured in the trench. Some soldiers remained trapped in the trenches during enemy offensives, turning the trenches into both a place of defense and imprisonment. This constant tension and fear added a dramatic element to trench life, where artists, soldiers often used trenches as a medium for artistic expression. On the walls of the trenches, one could find drawings, messages, and graffiti reflecting their creativity and expression. Letters from the trench. Soldiers would write letters to their families or loved ones from the trench, sharing their thoughts, fears, and hopes. The letters were transmitted by couriers or exchanged among soldiers. The Battle of the Alps, a monumental conflict that unfolded across the rugged mountainous terrain during World War I, stands out as one of the most protracted and fiercely contested battles in history. Fought on the Italian front, the battle spanned 12 grueling offensives, each aimed at gaining minuscule portions of territory amidst the challenging and treacherous landscape. The continuous struggle for control over the ISONZO River Valley and the Alps posed an unprecedented challenge for the opposing forces. The nature of mountain warfare added layers of complexity as soldiers navigated steep slopes, narrow passes, and harsh weather conditions. The battle's significance was not only in its strategic objectives, but also in the sheer tenacity displayed by the troops who faced unimaginable hardships. The Italian front's unique topography made every inch of ground highly coveted, and the combatants engaged in a relentless cycle of offensive and defensive maneuvers. The offensive game mode, inspired by historical offensives, places players in the midst of key moments during the Battle of the Alps. The landscape's breathtaking beauty contrasts sharply with the deadly struggle for control, creating an immersive experience that pays homage to sacrifices made by those who fought in this challenging theater of war. Winter on the front line. Winter in the Alps brought extreme cold snowstorms and frostbite, and soldiers endured harsh conditions in makeshift trenches, their determination keeping them focused on the larger mission. Surviving the bitter cold became a testament to the indomitable spirit of those stationed in the frozen heights. In the UK, this has been called the Forgotten Front, perhaps known only as the backdrop to Uniwesa Farewell to Arms, but it is far from forgotten in the countries affected. The most infamous battle was 1917 Scaporetto, whose name entered Italian idiom as a byword for disaster. Scaporetto is the Italian name for the tiny town of Kobar in Slovenia, very few miles on the same valley road. On the spot where Lucy Cristoni was killed, it was then also known by the German name Garfrey, underscoring the complexity of the area's history. In Austria, Garfrey was the miracle battle. This war cost the mainly Slovene-speaking civilian population of the area very dearly. Many were displaced to refugee camps or fell victim to hunger, cold, and disease. Once praised by the Austrian Emperor as the most loyal subjects, Slovene speakers were regarded with suspicion as Slavs and subject to heavy censorship from 1914 onwards, even as they fought alongside their German-speaking compatriots to preserve the Habsburg Empire. Italians in turn soon learned the cost of the expansionist ambitions of their government. Military discipline was homicidally brutal, and the ill-equipped invading troops suffered constant military setbacks at the hands of Austria-Hungary and its German allies, including one young commander named Erwin Rommel. Ultimately, Italy was on the victorious side, but did not receive everything it expected at the peace conference, which remained a source of great bitterness to nationalists and the bereaved. One of the greatest, most tragic, and largely overlooked campaigns during the First World War was the ISONZO front, which ran through an area inhabited by an ethnic Slovenian majority and in the part along the southern reaches of the ISONZO River by Italians, Friulians, and Germans. The region was part of the pact between the Triple Entente and Italy, which declared war on Austria-Hungary in 1915. This was a territory that is believed to have been visited by Dante Alighieri, and that was described by Ernest Hemingway in one of his novels. After Italy entered the war in May 1915, the ISONZO WWI presented the only real option for serious offensive operations into Austria since the remainder of the front was mountainous terrain heavily fortified by the Austro-Hungarians. But the ISONZO River, called the Sloka River today, presented a formidable obstacle, and the fortifications in the hills overlooking the river made any crossing almost impossible. Cadorna, like many of his contemporaries, was a firm believer in the offensive and the frontal assault. But operations in the area would not be easy. The ISONZO River was prone to flooding, and the terrain difficulties surrounding it were extreme, with enemy fortifications dug in atop steep rocky slopes. The Italian army was also suffering from a shortage of modern artillery, making a direct attack even more hazardous. The Italian offensive began on June 23, sparking the First Battle of Isonzo. Italian soldiers found themselves charging headlong uphill into barbed wire and fortifications that their artillery had been unable to break up, and attempting to cross the Isonzo while under ferocious Austro-Hungarian counter barrages. The fighting raged until Austro-Hungarian reinforcements arrived and stopped the offensive in its tracks. The Italian army had suffered nearly 15,000 casualties, nearly double the enemy's, while achieving practically no real gain. The Italians continued to launch offensives into 1917, and despite Italy's terrible losses, the Austro-Hungarians were beginning to feel the war of attrition. They simply did not have the manpower the Italians had, and their lines near Grazier were on the brink of collapse. At last, appeals to Germany for reinforcements were answered, and a combined offensive was launched against the Italians at Caporetto, who were all forward deployed with no reserves for a defense in depth. At 2 a.m. on October 24, massive artillery barrage featuring high explosive smoke and huge quantities of chemical weapons caught the Italian Second Army completely by surprise. Their lines were broken almost immediately by special German stormtrooper units practicing new assault tactics featuring flamethrowers and the mass use of hand grenades. By October 30, the Italians had withdrawn past the Tagliamento River. Italy had lost over 300,000 men in a week, most of them taken prisoner. The scale of the disaster led to the dismissal of Cadorna, shook the Allied governments, and led to France and England hurriedly reinforcing reinforcements to Italy. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians could not sustain the offensive at Isonzo as a viable front for the Italians was essentially gone. 2.5 years and more than 1.5 million casualties from both sides had resulted in no gains to speak of. The carnage of World War I. The Isonzo campaign stands out for bloodshed concentrated in a single sector. Cadorna in particular was one of the most callous, stubborn, and unimaginative generals in a were noted for its leaders, and the Italian army paid a terrible price for his ruthlessness and incompetence. The ISONZO and the disaster at Caporetto became a byword for failure in Italy, and the disillusionment caused by Italy's massive losses in the war with little to show, for it played a large role in the rise of fascism and dictator Benito Mussolini. Like so much of World War I, the ISONZO campaign played its own role in sparking World War I over 20 years later.